to the Rant Live.
Well, hello and welcome to the show, everybody. It is Monday, June 6th, 2022, and the Cubs just finished off a 5-game home series against the hated Cardinals, in which they really should have won the series, but due to some not great moments, which we'll get into here in a moment, they did not win the series, and but definitely some encouraging things happened.
Sure. there's at least one.
And that's the show, everybody.
Yeah. Woohoo. Yeah, no, I mean, and admittedly, so it was really odd. I had sort of a more distant experience of that Cubs series. There was some thought originally to going up there and watch some of those games, but I actually opted. My son and I were down in Tennessee the whole weekend to watch the Smokies. My Smokies BP hat here. And so I was at those games Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. So a lot of my Cubs viewing was either I watched Kilian start. Actually, we were at the Smokies game, and I had because I was far enough away from home that I wasn't blacked out, I could watch on MILB.TV, or I'm sorry, MLB.TV. I was at an MILB game, but we were able to watch. And of course, as soon as I turned it on, was in the fourth inning. Like I was following on game day, and then I realized, like, oh, I can pull this up. When he had the really shaky inning, and my son's like, "What it's your fault. You turned it on. You shouldn't turn it on. Now look what happened."
I love that.
I was like, "Oh, thanks, bud. That's awesome." But no, it was actually kind of nice because I got some of the cool stuff about the Cubs weekend, and I was listening to Friday's blowout on the drive down there. That wasn't great, but I was able to sort of distance myself from that and then really be more immersed in the AA side of things, which is a whole lot of fun. It was a ton of fun. So anyway,
you had a good weekend.
Good stuff either way.
So the Cubs, they end up taking 2 of 5, really close series. I mean, they haven't been. That's the weird thing about Major League Baseball that's different than kind of other sports. Really, if you've got a baseball, if you've got a football team in the NFL that's bad, they're going to get tore up a lot. And in Major League Baseball, I mean, the Cubs are not a great team, but they're not that far away. I mean, they're really bad in one-run games. They're 0-24 after trailing after the 6th inning, which is awful. There's some things that
impossible. Like that is
like that
just sheer dumb luck. You would think at some point would have to overrule that, right?
You would think so.
And so it's like a pretty good bullpen. Like that's what's weird. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it seems like they're every opportunity they get to lose, they do, if that makes sense, right? It's just like whenever there's an opportunity to lose, it happens, and so for whatever reason, and we'll get into the details of the series, but this is not a terrible team, but there are terrible moments within each game, it feels. And sometimes, there have been games, and there was a game or two in this series, and even against Milwaukee, where the Cubs play really well the whole game. The defense is there, the starting pitching is there, the bullpen comes in and does their job. They get just enough offense, 4, 5, 6 runs, and it's just it feels very, very simple when you watch games like that. And then there are other games where it's just like the defense not making plays that make sense, not necessarily making errors, but just just not hitting the cutoff man, or just not throwing the ball to second, or not throwing the ball to first when they had an easy out. We've seen things like that. It's just decision making isn't there really. And I assume some of that's going to get cleaned up as the prospects inevitably end up coming up to the Cubs just in general over the next couple of years. But the process, watching this kind of unfold, is a little difficult sometimes because it feels like it's being done on purpose almost.
Yeah, I mean, so And I'll tie that, I'll tie this back to the recent rumor from Bob Nightingale, right, who had an anonymous GM source saying the Cubs are guaranteed to sign one of the top 3 free, assuming Carlos Correa opts out, which is almost a certainty, and Xander Bogaerts opts out, which again is almost a certainty, and then you've got Trey Turner. That's the exact same thing we heard. We didn't hear it was a guarantee, but we heard all about them being all up in the shortstop market. Now, I want to ask you, because you just said, and I agree with you, the Cubs have had a lot of bad moments, and that has led to a bad record. But, outside of the occasion which any team is going to have, they're not the Phillies, right? They're not the Phillies who went out and got all these guys, and now they've actually won a few, but they just had to fire their manager because they were so bad, despite having Bryce Harper and Nick Castellanos and Kyle Schwarber and others. Are you saying that had the Cubs maybe gone out and gotten a marquee type player like a Carlos Correa, that they might be having a decidedly different season in which they wouldn't be 0 for 24 in some of those close games or when they were losing late, or that they would have better records in one-run games? Do you think it's fair to say that adding an elite level player might make a huge difference in terms of their record and their performance this year? One player.
Yes, definitely. I think that it's more than just
the other moves they made, right?
Yeah, I think it's more than just a one-player solution. I think there are some players that are on the team that shouldn't be on the team.
Yeah.
And I think we've got comments over here. I don't know what this Tom Benzel dude is even talking about, but
I never said, I know it's probably more of a joke that he's saying, but I definitely never said Madrigal was a great player. I thought he should have fit really well with this team if he hit like he did with the White Sox.
And he's been a bust.
Anyway, yeah.
Now, of course, he was injured and he was out for a while, but Nick Madrigal would be at the top of my list for disappointments of the season. Let's go down the games. So on Thursday, the Cubs won 7-5. Keegan Thompson is he is pitching so well this season. I mean, he's definitely pitching like an all-star. So I'd be very surprised if, unless he just falls apart here soon, if he doesn't make the all-star team. 5 and a third innings pitched, 5 hits, 3 runs, 3 walks, a little wild, 3 strikeouts. He goes to 6-0 with a 1.99 ERA. I mean, dude is looking really, really good. Much better than you could have anticipated or even hoped for. 3 home runs in that game by the Cubs. Contreras, Schwindel, who is red hot right now, and Ian Happ all hit home runs. Cubs win 7-5. Friday, a much different story. Stroman, I had put in my lineup post how good Stroman had been doing in his last, I think it was 5 games. He had a 1.8 ERA over his previous 5 games, giving up just 6 runs over 30 innings pitched. I mean, he had been really, really good, and he came out and was just terrible, like absolutely terrible. By far the worst start of the series for the Cubs. 4 innings, 10 hits, 9 runs. He had 7 Ks and only 1 walk, but maybe the problem was he was just living in the zone a little bit too much. And man, he looked really bad. And then Leiter and wasn't any better. And he came in. It's weird how Ross is using Leiter. It's like, is he a starter? Is he a bullpen guy? Not real sure there. And I think maybe it's confusing to Leiter, maybe not. And then, of course, Schwindel came in that game. Wisdom hit a home run. So that's encouraging. The Cubs offense really looking good in this series, and we'll get to the stats here in a minute. Saturday, 6-1 win. Matt Swarmer.
Yeah.
What do you think about this guy? Man.
I like it. I am a little bit concerned about how well he'll be able to keep that up. I think it's always kind of nice. He's got the unique thing with the big leg kick. He throws a ton of sliders. There's nothing bad you can say about his first 2 starts. He's been incredible in both of them. And he really has, like, I saw him pitch last year for Iowa when they came through Indianapolis, and somebody had actually reached out to me. It's like, oh man, sorry, you got to watch Swarmer pitch, because he at the time he was in the midst of just an awful stretch of starts. But he really, really, like, almost immediately after that, I think that was early July. really started leaning heavily into the slider. I mean, he's throwing it. I didn't see the breakdown of his most recent start. I know his first one was like over half of his pitches were sliders, right? And
Yeah,
so
I think he was there with this most
yeah,
recent
so
start as well.
that he's got a ton of deception between that and the big leg kick, and if that continues to work for him, I think he's serviceable. I do think, though, you know, if we're being realistic about it, unless he really maintains that, there's enough other guys that are coming up and that they need to go out and probably sign another top line starter that I don't know if there's room for him there. But hell yeah, man, it's fun to watch, and he's been great.
Yeah, he's
Pac-Man
been.
just died.
What happened?
Pac-Man just died, I think. That sound. That's your phone, I think.
That was my phone. Sorry. The production value once again shines through. In his minor league starts in 2022, he had a 2.08 ERA, 3-1 record, 42 Ks over 39 innings. So what we're seeing from him is very consistent with how he performed in the minors, at least this past season, or this season, I should say. His prior season, though, wasn't as good, 4.79 ERA between two teams. So, yeah, I mean, maybe he's figured something out. Maybe it's just going to take a minute for the major league hitters to catch up to him.
Yeah,
we'll see.
well,
He's a good.
Yeah, I was going to say he was the Cubs minor league pitcher of the year in 2018 as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was bad in 2019. 2020 was, they didn't play. Last year he was bad for most of the first half. He picked it up. He did a lot better down the stretch. So I mean, he's shown flashes of that before. It's just again, it's a matter of consistency. But at this point, like, hey, if the Cubs can get with everybody who's been injured, and the rough kind of the lack of consistency they've gotten from Hendrickson and Stroman, if you can call a guy up from the minors and have him, pump out 5-6 innings of 1-run ball for you, that's pretty darn good. So I'll take it all day.
Yeah, exactly. So a pleasant surprise there. In that Saturday game, the first game, the Cubs won easily. Schwindel had a home run, multiple hits by Morel, Schwindel, Horner, and Madrigal. Christopher Morel is just a game changer. And here's a guy who is a 21st ranked prospect in MLB pipeline rankings. I mean, just think about that for a second. Look at the impact that he's had on the big league team as the 21st ranked prospect, and think about the 20 guys in front of him. One of those guys was Nelson Velasquez, who didn't stick, but he didn't get very many at-bats either. So, I mean, if you want to, look to the future, I guess that's a pretty exciting look where you see a guy like Morel come up and do what he's doing and basically forcing the Cubs' hands, because you really had to think that he was going to be going back down to Iowa, probably, I guess. But he can't, right? I mean, he's been on base. What is it, 20 straight games now?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain guys, right? You look at those rankings, and I totally get it, and it's not a common thing by any stretch, right? Normally you see a guy get a little bit worse, not worse, but normally their performance will dip a little bit at each level simply because they're facing higher competition, right? If you are better than everyone at or good enough to be promoted out of low A, you feel a little bit of a bump, right? You go to high A, the pitcher's a little bit better, whatever. But I do think, and this, you see this, I think, more frequently maybe in college basketball, where the rules changes and the way the game changes moving to the NBA actually favors some players, particularly if they're like wings in the Big Ten. But Morel feels like one of those guys where, for whatever reason, his game may actually translate better to the majors, and maybe it'll all fall apart next week and we'll be saying something different. But just the energy that he plays with and the way he goes about, the moment doesn't get too big for him. And I think maybe that's part of it, right? Is you do have the one big difference you see, and granted, it was a packed house down there in Kodak on Saturday, but then Sunday there were like a couple thousand people there. You're frequently playing in front of very small crowds. The energy is different, and so I wonder with some guys if and with someone like him who clearly every teammate he's ever had has talked about his electricity and his enthusiasm. And, again, I just wonder if that plays, if there is something psychologically that allows him to step up and just be the man right away, just be a dude where, again, he was only ranked 21st, and I think sometimes you see that a guy that gets drafted lower or somebody who gets a really low signing bonus or something like that, right? And the history is littered with tons of players who came up and did better than what their expectations were. I just love watching the guy play. Like he's just fun. So keep him up. I don't care what else happens, although I said the same thing about Kilian, and he gets sent down like right after that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's batting .291. He's slugging .468. He's got a 138 WRC plus. There's really not much more you could ask from a guy who's come up and played in his first 20 games now, believe it or not. And he's plugged into the starting lineup every single day.
He's batting leadoff. Like he's the leadoff hitter they haven't been able to find, right? Like, let's sign this guy. Let's move this all around. It's oh no, let's just call up Chris Morel and then let him bat leadoff every day. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that 1-2. Their offense since he's been up has been fantastic. I mean they're averaging over 5 runs a game. In this series, they average 5 runs a game. So the offense has really ticked up since Christopher Morel has been added to the roster. The second game on Saturday, the Cubs lose. It's Kilian's debut. They lost 7-4. He goes 5 innings, 3 hits, 3 runs, 2 walks, 6 Ks. As you mentioned, that 4th inning was rough. I was pretty happy to see the 4th inning just because I think he bounced back from that inning pretty well. Although he did kind of fall apart, it didn't feel like that was him falling apart because he wasn't good enough. That just felt like a kind of a mental hiccup, to be honest, more than anything. And then he bounced back from it really well. In the 5th inning, he got a strikeout, fly out, a single, and then another strikeout. And then that was the end of the day for him. But I thought, given, that it was his initial start, his pro debut, that it went really, really well. What didn't go well is Michael Rucker, who came in and just couldn't get an out, gave up 3 hits, 4 runs, and a walk in the top of the 10th, and it was over just like that. You were very encouraged going into that inning. Maybe they'll be able to get a win in Kilian's first start. The Cubs scratched out some runs in that game. There were 6 players had multi-hit games: Morel, Wilson Contreras, Ian Happ, Ortega, PJ Higgins, and Jason Hayward, all of which had doubles except for Higgins. And so it was offensively again a pretty good game. They didn't get enough runs across, but it was really just Michael Rucker. That's all I could really take away from that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about it too. Caleb Kilian, my birthday bro. I am 18 years older, but we share a birthday, and that was last Thursday when he got the call that he was coming up. So pretty cool.
Oh, really?
Present.
He got the call on his birthday?
Yeah. How cool is that? I did not realize
that. That's cool.
And then, but what's also cool, is that so he made his debut on June 4th, which is so, and he talked about he struck out Yadi Molina twice, which is pretty cool. Yadi Molina awesome. Debuted on June 3rd of 2004. So Yadi Molina debuted the day after Caleb Kilian turned 7, and then and here we are. 18 years later, and Kilian struck the guy out. So, but it is kind of, I just thought that was funny. There's like both of them debuted within, well, I don't know what Yadi's birthday is, but right in that same, within a day of each other to the date. And then right after
I think
birthday,
Yadi's closer to you in age.
Yeah, he's significantly closer to me, like 3 years. And Albert Pujols is probably older than me. Adam Wainwright, who I'm sure you'll get to here in a moment. He's also in that 40 range. So they got a lot of oldsters, but it is, as you mentioned, I was more encouraged. It looked rough, man. There were a couple, like you said, that 4th, because that first walk was at the one to Arenado was like not the balls were not close. Like they were not. It wasn't like he was missing on the fringes. Like they looked bad, and that was like the look of those was like what you might expect for a guy to come out in the first inning and throw a couple, like really just uncork some bad ones. He had the wild pitch in there too, but to see that, right, to have gone from and he mowed him down. Was it 7 pitches? His first 7 pitches resulted in 2 strikeouts. right? That's like, you can't do any better. And he was going through these innings in 9, 10, 11 pitches, and then to run into that spot, but then to come back, get 2 strikeouts, close the 5th really well. That to me spoke more to his ability to keep going. And that's why it bothers me. I get it. You've got all these guys who are coming back off the IL, but I'm like, look, man, none of these dudes who are coming back off. I love me some Alec Mills, and Wade Miley can do some things, and Drew Smiley, whatever. But put those guys in one basket and then put Caleb Kilian in the other, and if we're weighing their value toward the future, Kilian, right? Kilian has quite a bit more weight. It's frustrating because there's nothing else for him to accomplish at AAA. There's nothing more that he's going to learn down there. You've already got him up. You've already had to roster him on the 40-man. Let him keep going and then figure out what you need to. But there again, I get it. I hate it.
And that's where I say, there are some pretty obvious moves. I mean, A, not ever playing Michael Rucker again would be one of them. B would be sending Nick Madrigal to AAA forever. And then there are a number of other what feels like could be obvious moves. There are definitely guys you could continue to bring up from Triple and Double A to give shots at the big league level, and you feel like this is a pretty close to 500 level team. I mean, the fact that they've lost so many close games, they're 6-13 in 1-run games. And I don't even know what that record would be if you start looking at 2-run games, but it's probably a lot worse. And, just some of the mistakes that they've made and the Andrelton Simmons being there and, Jonathan VR and some of the guys like that who you could probably dispense of and bring in some younger guys. David Bodie's going to be coming back. What's going to happen when Bodie comes back? I assume Madrigal is going to be going down to AAA, but who knows?
Yeah, then you got the whole Jason Hayward thing. There's a lot for a team that has overall, again, has played as poorly at times and has as bad a record as they do. And maybe these things go together, but they sure have a glut of players in the, it's not like we're looking at this going like, oh, they've got a bunch of difference makers who are hurt. They have a team filled largely with role players, right? And that's the problem, is because they went from a team filled largely with guys who were supposed to be foundational pieces and not enough role players to a team full of role players with not enough foundational pieces. And that's where you come in when I look at things like that and you say, we look at those close games, do you have that start? I mean, Wilson Contreras can be that guy. And that's as close as they get. We've talked about Morel, and it's not a surprise that they've been playing better in general. The offense has fired better with those two at the top of the order, right? It's helped that Frank Schwindel turned things around since his one-day demotion. But it's very difficult then to win those games when you're doing plug and play with your 6 through 9 batters and just wondering who the hell are you going to be able to get a hit out of at that point, and so it's taken a while for them to establish that. So I don't know. It's tough at times to watch that, but like I said, I think there are, once we get all those guys back, like, roster decisions are going to have to be made when these guys and that's the only good thing that comes out of it, is that then they're going to be forced to, with David Bodie, they either have to DFA him or activate him and demote Nick Madrigal. And then you figure out what's going on with Bodie. And, again, does he stick around as these guys keep coming up? Once Suzuki comes back, right? Clint Frazier's already back up there. Now what do? You've got to start making some choices here. And then VR's going to, I got to
be honest, I'm not a huge Clint Frazier fan. I see a lot of people pounding the drum that Clint Frazier should be in there. I don't think he brings much more value than Jason Hayward, and I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I think you should look at their numbers and compare.
I think the value might be in forcing them to get rid of Hayward. But either way, I mean, once you have some of these guys come back, again, whether it's VR and some of the others, and they start coming off, there's only so much room, right? And they'll continue to find ways. I mean, God, when's the last time we heard about Michael Hermosillo, right? There's a bunch of these dudes who are just kind of hanging around out there, and I'm sure they'll find a way to shuffle this stuff through.
Was Hermosillo in the 60-day?
I don't know. Did they move him to 60-day? Probably. And then they'll
Just to make
have,
room on the
after
40
the
man.
trade deadline is when we start seeing some legitimate moves happen, because then they're going to clear space because they have to, right? as long as like Smiley and Miley are actually healthy, which Smiley may well not be if it's an oblique thing, that those things linger. It's just, that's the frustrating part, right? Is you're like, oh, well, this guy, no, because the only thing you're worried about is not this guy coming off the IL to help. It's this guy's coming off the IL. What corresponding move do they have to make to clear room, and how lateral is that move then? That's all I feel. They're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, right? Rather than actually patching a hole. Like the ship's going down one way or the other. It's just what order are the chairs going to be in, and that's not really fun. That's not a whole lot to look forward to until, hopefully after the deadline, and we can see some of these guys maybe coming up that we can look at and be like, oh yeah, I can see how this guy can help in 23, 24 and beyond.
Exactly. One of those guys being Sunday starter, Justin Steele. And Justin Steele's ERA is over 5. I'm not sure if it went down. It's probably went down a little bit after yesterday's performance, but he allowed only 1 earned run due to the really terrible defense behind him. He's had some of the worst defense behind him all year. And you talk about, I remember he was playing in one game where, God, I don't know if it was VR couldn't figure out what base to throw the ball to, right? And the guy ended up being safe on first or second or whatever it was. Just terrible decisions that I don't think necessarily lead to errors. Some of them do, and last night there was one, and he's had a couple games, a misplay by Clint Frazier in the outfield a week or so ago, and just all this bad defense behind Justin Steele, but he has been really, really good. I think he's been not as good as Thompson, but not that far off. Thompson has had the benefit of, not being a starter the entire season, whereas Steele has been in the starting lineup the entire season. And so he went 7 innings, 7 hits, 2 runs, 1 was earned, 3 walks and a strikeout. And I just thought he just looked really, really good. I mean, he's not overpowering, and he did have those 3 walks to just 1 K. But I think he's locating the ball really well. I think he's getting weak contact a lot, and it just feels like he's kind of found his groove, so to speak. And I think that's a young guy that's definitely going to be a part of this this pitching staff in the future.
Yeah, and I mean he's been outside of, were it not for injuries, I should say, kind of early on, he had to battle through a bunch of that stuff, and it really slowed down his progression through the minors. But he's the guy the Cubs have been high on, since they signed him, really. It's just taken longer than anybody would have necessarily expected for that to kind of come together. And he was talking about kind of John Lester, sort of drawing some inspiration from him. I know he's worked with Cole Hamels in the past on his changeup, and just the idea of like how to attack hitters, because he doesn't have the overpowering fastball. And I know that his velocity is down a little bit, which is part of the reason I still look at him and I think if things worked out ideally with the rest of their guys coming up, and if they were to sign somebody, I still think he works best, honestly, in the type of role that Thompson was in. Because he can do shorter outings. I think the fastball plays up a little bit better. He's had trouble in the past kind of putting guys away, but when he's at his best, he's attacking hitters early with the fastball. And again, in that kind of John Lester, when we saw Lester at his best with the Cubs, at least, right, he was working 93 with the fact, he wasn't in the mid to upper 90s or anything like that. And it's getting those pitchers strikes. If you can work in to those guys, you can bust righties in and then come back with the slide of the curve, things like that. The change, I'd really like to see that come along, continue to come along. But yeah, I mean, and he's he knows how to pitch. He's been in the system for a long time, and it does feel like when he is aggressive and not trying to get hitters to chase, when he's willing to go into the zone and try to beat hitters in the zone, much better pitcher. And I like watching him work when that's the case. When he gets out of, and that's that higher ERA that he had, again, a lot of that was a result of kind of dancing around a little bit, trying to get a little too cute. and then you end up now it's 3-0, 3-1, and now you've got to come in with something that it's not a challenge fastball. You're looking to get me over and pipe one, and guess what? When you're facing some of the best hitters on the planet, it's tough to get it by them.
Yeah, but I mean, when you start to look at the starting pitchers that the Cubs have, I mean, let's just talk about Keegan Thompson, Matt Swarmer, Caleb Kilian, and Justin Steele, and then Marcus Stroman. Forget about Kyle Hendricks. I think they should trade him. I hope they do trade him. But I love Kyle Hendricks. That's not saying I don't. I just think, practically speaking,
he just
from
looks kind of washed,
pure baseball perspective. But if you look at just those 5 guys, I mean, you feel pretty good about that. Definitely heading into next season. I don't know about Swarmer or where he's going to be, but you could put somebody else in there in Swarmer's case and have Kilian, Steele, Thompson, and Stroman to build around. And I'd feel pretty good about that. And the Cubs' ability to, kind of patch together year after year a bullpen, you feel pretty good about the bullpen too. I mean, obviously they're probably going to end up trading Robertson. I mean, hopefully they do, because he's 37 years old and this isn't going to last forever. Givens, who, I'm not a huge fan of Givens anyways. And maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 other guys out of there, but it feels like, and you look at the offense that the Cubs have, I mean, I really feel like this Cubs team could be competitive for a wild card spot. I don't know necessarily for the division title starting next season, particularly if they sign Wilson Contreras. And I think that's the big piece, because without Wilson Contreras, I just don't see how they're going to be competitive next season. They keep Wilson Contreras. They add, a few pieces in the offseason. They start to spend some money on a player like maybe Carlos Correa. They bring in maybe another 2-3 pitchers, 1 starter, and a couple bullpen guys. And you're not feeling real bad about this team. You DFA Jason Hayward. You just eat that contract. There are some moves that they could make that seem pretty obvious that would put them into a pretty competitive position next season.
Yeah, I mean, and let's say again, moving on from David Bodie or Nick Madrigal, you sign a shortstop and you move Nico Horner over to second base / third base / utility guy, which I've been clamoring for them to do for 2 years. And don't get me wrong, he's done really, really well as the everyday shortstop when he's been healthy, right? But again, he's not Trey Turner, he's not Xander Bogaerts, he's not Carlos Correa. If you can get one of those guys, and it allows you to move, and then Chris Morel can play all over the field as well, right? He can back up at short, second, third, outfield, right? He's been playing plenty of center. If you do move on from Hayward and you do go get, whether it's an everyday guy, but you got Suzuki and Happ at the corners, you figure some of those things out. They need a left-handed power hitter. That would be great to find out there, again, because you got a DH role you can do that with. There's, and I'm saying a bunch of things, but a lot of it has to do with moving on from some guys and just clearing out that space, so that, because right now it just feels like the lineup outside of a couple of guys is kind of a toss-up, like who's going to be playing where on any given day, and you'll see that stuff moved around. I'd rather see, and I get it, like
especially the infield
Joe Madden thing. Yeah, it's just, but there's a bunch of guys just like, okay, you feel like you have a bunch of dudes who need playing time, except actually you don't. You have a bunch of guys who are getting playing time, but there's a lot of them who probably don't need it. But yeah, I mean, the path there, it's not about having to go out and spend $300 million, annually, right? You're gonna have to spend that on a player perhaps, but if they could lock that in and have, and again, as you mentioned, Contreras, now I think part of it, like, then they're sitting there going, well, when Gomes comes back, and then Higgins has been really good, so maybe, it's like, okay, yeah, but this is exactly what they said they wanted to do. It's what I wrote about. I'm not the only one, but I mean, I did write about it, where with the Gomes thing, the big part of that was being able to DH Contreras more frequently and have him not catch as much.
Which they've done.
Yeah, and they have done, and now he's having this tremendous offensive season. But can we? I do want to talk about this a little bit, because I think if you do re-sign him, having the DH is helpful, because he's a really free. Okay, like I know he had been improving in that regard, but there are a lot of times when he just boxes pitches, and like he costs a lot of strikes. It seems like he gets
He does
crossed up on
because
some
he
of those
over frames.
right, and he's like, and there's somewhere he's like
moves
jumping
too
out and
much.
pulling the ball outside the thing. So I actually like it that he's DHing more because I think that improves his value. There's only snap throws are cool, but for every time one of those works, there's like 6 times when it doesn't matter, right? Where it just it's a thing that you did because you can kind of show off. So, but no, I mean, I love him there. I do. I can't imagine. I still can't see them actually re-signing him, but we'll see. We'll see.
I don't see it either. But then I think all they're doing is just prolonging the timeline. I mean, you see the pieces are there. There's only so many prospects that you can have in a system and make it be productive still.
Because who else are you adding? Like, what are they going to do at that point? Like what are you adding to? Where are they going to go? They're already at the point almost where they've got too many guys. I mean, you can never have too right. I don't want to say, I don't mean that, but like, where are they going to go? And if you, with as many young players as they picked up last year, and now they've got a few guys who are driving. Christian Hernandez still coming up through there, and you can keep adding those guys. I would prefer that they get rid of a lot of those fringy players on the 40-man roster currently and upgrade a couple of those spots, right? And then you let that stuff happen more organically, because again, if you have Gomes on a long-term deal, not long-term, but a multi-year deal, is back next year, you've got Higgins around, you can carry 3 catchers with that DH. And his Contreras has the value. I think the question will be, how does he value himself, and is that in line with what the Cubs value him at? Because I again, that's the other thing I've said. Like, I'll stick by. I want him to stick around, but I've stuck by the idea that I feel like he's one of them who they're definitely going to value that differently, and I think he might want kind of that Real Muto type deal, and I don't know that that's the value that they're going to pay for it, particularly when, and part of this is maybe strategic, where they're looking at, say, well, you're not an everyday catcher. We've had you DHing X amount, whether that's part of the arbitration thing too. We'll see. That comes down Wednesday. There's a lot at play that I think goes beyond just giving him the best possible chance to have the best season he can offensively. I think part of that comes down to, at the same time, devaluing his overall worth in a contract, because if you're a catcher every day, you're catching 1,000 innings and hitting like that, that is different from you caught 500 innings and you DH'd half the time and had this season. Maybe I'm just very, very skeptical about the Cubs' overall machinations, but I could see that entering the equation at some point.
Well, and as I mentioned, I mean, their offense has really come to life in this series alone. They hit 319 with a 481 slugging percentage, 141 WRC plus. So their offense is looking good, and this isn't just something that's happened over this series. I think if you go back the last month or so, they're averaging over 5 runs a game, and so it's really the pitching that has struggled, and and not their inability to win these close games. And so I don't think that's going to change much. In fact, I think it's going to get worse because, as we had mentioned, it seems like Contreras is probably headed out the door, but it's one of those things where they have to have 2 different analyses going, right? They've got to have one that says, all right, you keep Contreras, you extend him. What does your team look like next year and the 2-3 years after that? And then you trade him, and then what do you get back? And then how does that all fit into place? It's just creating. There's going to be another window of competitiveness that's going to come up, within the next 2 to 3 years. And it's a matter of how quickly does that window open? Does it open next season? Because it feels like if you sign Contreras, that window should open next season, and you're going to be bringing some guys up, maybe some younger guys, but younger guys can tear it up. I mean, and we've seen that happen with Chris Morel. He's not really super young. Or was he like 23 or something?
Yeah, but I'll say if they re-sign Contreras and they don't go for it next year, then
that's the thing.
that is some serious bullshit.
But that's what I'm saying.
Bullshit.
So
Yeah,
think about this: Patrick Wisdom at third, right? Carlos Correa at short. Move Nico to second. Your first is either Schwindel, Rivas, or you have to bring somebody else in. Your outfield, Suzuki, Happ. Either Morel's in center. Well, Morel would be in center. You have Contreras behind the dish, and then you've got the starters that we talked about. That seems like a really competitive team to me.
Yeah, I mean, if those things all work out, then you've got a bench that, again, is who knows who comes up, right? And who else they could play there, but they've just got to solidify some of that stuff. Like I said, they have a bunch of guys where it's and look, Rafael Ortega has been a decent player, right? But I mean, you've got Ortega and Bodie and VR and Madrigal and a bunch of these guys who are just like, and that's fine. Yeah. If that is your guy that's going to play, he's going to make a start every fourth game or whatever. He's going to come on for a pinch hit here or there.
Those are the types of guys you need on the bench, right? I mean, if you bring the young guys up, the young guys need to be starting. They shouldn't be on the bench.
Yeah, and that's where, again, then you can kind of pick and choose. And you figure out, okay, well, if this guy gets hurt, well, then we can call somebody up or we can move in here. I don't feel like they've had, whether it's by injury or performance or what, the consistency just hasn't been there. You don't ever get the feel that like, okay, this is the capital T, capital H, capital E everyday lineup for this club. And here's what it is that you knew outside of Madden doing something weird or moving somebody to a different position. Like you knew here's at least 1 through 6. Here's where these guys are going to be. Right. And sometimes you knew that meant Albert Almora leading off, which was just awful. Although he hit a grand slam the other day. So,
I saw that.
but to kind of solidify that and then to know exactly where you need to plug in gaps and what you need to, they just don't have enough of those guys that are there all the time. So, it'll be, again, and I'm biased at this point. Like it was exciting to watch some of those minor league guys. And it's really cool to see what they've got coming up. And I really, really like, there was some stuff written about this prior to the season about just the vibe, like the culture that they're building throughout the organization. And I know that's not something that a lot of people want to hear about because the Cubs aren't playing well and that's tough. And I agree with you on that front, but to be at the game yesterday, they're playing the Birmingham Barons, the White Sox farm club. I mean, every game, but in particular yesterday, I was just paying attention to it. The Tennessee Smokies, every one of those players, when they're not on the field, they're all up on the top rail or on the top step over the rail of the dugout, cheering, watching the game. Everybody for Birmingham sitting on the bench in the dugout. It was a totally different look, a totally different vibe, just everything about it. Man, somebody's very excited about their Tinder stuff here. Sorry, that's in the comments for anybody who might be listening to this, but I saw that and these guys are friends. They've built that. Now I know they all won't be able to continue up through the entire system together, but it was really cool to see that and that it showed, right, in the way that they play and the way they just work
the
out
camaraderie beforehand. They've got, right?
Yeah, and that was something that the Cubs have been very intentional about establishing, and so it will be interesting to see that continue to happen because we're starting to see it that with Morel coming up and bringing some of that same that togetherness and that vibe that he's helped create. He's bringing that with him. He brought it with him up to the majors and to see the little connection that he's got with Contreras and things like that to continue because that was one of the most exciting things about that 2015 team and the 2016 team as the young guys got up and they brought in some guys from, whether it be Lester. And again, we can talk about his performance, but for all that, Hayward's been a great leader and to have created this culture that people wanted to be a part of. Other people wanted to sign with the Cubs. They wanted to come up and I don't think that's there. I think it can be back, but you got that vibe from it. It was really, really cool to see and just to get a look at those guys up close. So I would highly recommend it to any of you who have the opportunity. Get out there, and it's right by Smoky Mountain National Parks. You can go have some fun there, or if you're into the touristy stuff, Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and whatnot. But that's one of the things I think I enjoyed most about it was seeing that how it used to look watching the Cubs, how it used to feel watching the Cubs in those super competitive years there, in addition to the winning, was just like you just got a different sense of like those guys all loved playing together, and that there wasn't any sense of
at least at the beginning.
maybe
I'm
not
sure
toward the end. I think
towards the end it kind of
and I
got a
do
little
think
stale.
I think ego's got in the way a little bit too, right? I think they came into it with kind of setting those egos aside, and that was what was kind of fun about it. That may have changed down the road, but we're seeing it. Hopefully that comes back, but at least it's been since Morel's come back up. They've at least been more fun to watch on a daily basis, even in some of those games that they're not necessarily winning.
A bit more palatable,
yeah,
I would say. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to be encouraged about, and I just think it's the question is, when are the Cubs going to try to start competing? Is it going to be next season, or is it going to be 2024? And we will know the answer to that question if they trade Wilson Contreras or not.
Yeah,
plain and simple. I just don't think they have the ability to be. They don't have really any core to speak of, right? I mean, I guess Ian Happ can be your clubhouse leader if you want him to be, but feels like Wilson Contreras really fills that role kind of better than anybody else. So anyways, the Cubs go on the road to take on the Orioles for 2 games. And then they have, I don't know, like 17 games in a row. It's 1, 2, 7, 14. Wow. 17 games in a row after this Orioles series. So they're a day off today, 2 games in Baltimore, another day off, and then 17 straight, 3 against the Yankees in New York. They have a 7-game homestand against the Padres and the Braves. Then they go on the road for 4 against the Pirates, and then 3 more against the Cardinals. And then when's the trade deadline?
August 2nd, I believe.
Yeah, so we've got a while before that kicks in. It'll be interesting to see if the Cubs try to jump the market to the extent that they do. I mean, I don't mind trading guys. Here's what I would love to have happen: is the Cubs to trade guys like Robertson, Miley, Smiley,
Wiley, Riley,
all the Ileys, and to keep Contreras, because I think they can get plenty back from trading those other guys.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to trade Contreras. And I just see Contreras as such a vital part of this team. And I think it belongs. I think he deserves the respect from the organization. I think he has the respect from the fans. And I think, there's been too long a stretch here where the Cubs front office hasn't rewarded the guys who have been there and who are part of the kind of the heart and soul of this team.
Yeah.
And I would like to see that happen once.
Dig it.
So that's the deal. We're going to have to go because we got some other stuff going on today, but hopefully you do too. And we'll try to circle back on, was it Thursday? Thursday.
Yeah, they got Tuesday, Wednesday, and then off Thursday before the Yankees.
Try to circle back on Thursday before the Yankees series, but that should be an interesting, fun series. So until then, everybody, thanks for joining us.
See you.
We'll see you later.